Okay, so today we start talking about statistics, and we are going to start with our measures of center, very basics, things that you have covered in previous years. So starting with just kind of the definition of a measure of center. Measures of centers are statistical values that summarize a set of data with one value that represents the center. So just looking for kind of a middle ground for these data points. So one of the measures that we use is mean. Mean is the average of all values in the data set. Median is another measure of center that we use, and this is the middle number. Of all values in the data set. And of course, the values need to be written in least to greatest order in order for us to find that median value. And our mode is also a measure of center, although it's not a very accurate measure of center. Not very often does it actually come across as a statistical value that we can use for data, but occasionally it does represent something that's useful. So this is the value or values, there could be more than one, that occur most often. And that most often value is not always going to be a middle number, and so that's why it's not always the most accurate piece of information, but it can be helpful at times. So we start, mean is found by adding all the values together and then dividing that sum by the total number of values. Median is found by putting the values in order from least to greatest, and again we're saying that again because it's so important that you do it, and then locating the middle value. If there are two middle values, so if it's an even number of data, you're going to take the average of the two middle numbers. And then the last one is mode. Mode is found by ordering the values, and least to greatest is usually the most common way to do that, and then locating the number or the numbers that occur most often. Okay, there can be more than one mode, just depending, and there could also be no modes. They could all be entered one value each, so there may not be a mode. Alright, so here's an example. Let's just talk through and work through. We're going to need your calculator for this. If you don't have it, you may want to pause and go grab it. So Charlie and Linda have each bowled 6 games this week in preparation for a tournament next weekend. And so Charlie bowled the following scores: 133, 187, 133, 164, 171, and 122. Linda bowls 142, 116, 137, 140, 158, and 192. So first thing I'm going to do before I start doing anything else, I'm always going to just order my values least to greatest. That way, no matter what I'm looking for, my values are already in order that I can find them. So Charlie, from least to greatest, it's going to be 122, 133, 133, 164, 171, and 187. And then Linda's values, she in order is 116, 137, 140, 142, 158, and 194. Let's just make sure that we have all of our values. So let's see, 122, 133, 133, 164, 171, 187. So we've got all of Charlie's, and then Linda, 116, 137, 140, 142, 158, and 194. Alright, so we have them and they're in order now. So to find that average, or the mean of Charlie and Linda's scores, we're going to have to add these values together and divide by the number of values. So for Charlie, we're going to do 122 plus 133 plus 133 plus 164 plus 171 plus 187, and we're going to divide all of that by 6 because that's how many scores he had. So with my calculator, I'm going to add those numbers together, and I get 910. That's what I'm going to do, dividing by 6, and I get 151.67. I'm going to round to 2 decimal places just to keep things even. Now Linda, same thing, I'm going to take and add her values together, 116, 137, 140, 142, 158, and 194, and divide all of those by 6. 37, 140, 142, 158, and 194, and I add those together, and I get 887, and divide that by 6. And so I end up with 147.83. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm going to divide that by the 6 and get 147.83. Okay. So to find the median of their scores, for Charlie, I go to my numbers here, and I have 122, 187, 171, and 133, and then I have 2 numbers here in the middle. So I'm going to have to take the average of those. So 133 plus 164 divided by 2, and get 297 divided by 2, and I have an average of 148.5 there. So my middle number here is about 148.5. And then we'll do the same thing for Linda, and she also has 6 scores, so our 2 middle numbers are 140 and 142. So if I take the average of those, and of course I know that it's going to be 141, but I'm just going to double check. So I have 282 divided by 2 is 141. Okay, so Charlie has an average of 151, and Linda has an average of 147, whereas Charlie has a median of 148 and Linda has a median of 141. So notice that their middle numbers are a good bit lower than their average scores. So just kind of keep that in mind as we work through this. Now mode for Charlie, he has 133 that present themselves twice. No other numbers come more than once, so Charlie's going to have to be 133. And Linda has 6 different scores, so there is no mode for her. Okay. Alright, so those are the basics, just kind of measures of center. And notice that 133 is not really close to Charlie's average or his middle number. It's not really all that helpful for looking at his data, but it's there in case we wanted to know like what score he most frequently scored. Then that would be a useful piece of information. Alright, now part D, it says this: they decide to bowl a 7th game. Charlie bowls a 97 and Linda bowls a 162. So Charlie had a really rough off night that night. Linda, however, had a really good night. So how does this new score change the mean and median of their scores? So we have to kind of re-evaluate what we have. So with Charlie's mean, he did have a total of 910, but we're going to add that 97 in, and so now he has 1,007 for his sum of his scores. And now instead of 6 scores, there are 7 scores. So I'm going to take 1,007 and divide it by 7. And so his new average is 143.86. So that one low score really dropped him quite a bit for an average. Now Linda's average, she had a total of 887 points, and we're adding a game where she bowled 162. So she ends up with 1,049 for her total points. Divide that by the 7 games, and she now has a score of 149.86. So not as much of an increase for her, but definitely a big drop for Charlie. Alright, so now let's look at our median scores. So let's enter our scores again in least to greatest. So Charlie, of course, that 97 is going to go first for him, and then all of the other numbers are going to follow. 164, 171, and 187. And this time there are, oops, I missed a number. So 122, 133, and then another 133, 164, 171, and 187. And so this time there are 7 numbers, so he actually does have a middle number. And in this case, it is 133. Now, Linda scored that 162, which is going to go towards the end of hers, so we're going to put hers back in order. 7, 140, 142, 158, and then that 162 goes here. And so when we go to her middle score, we have a 142. So again, Charlie's median number went from a 148.5 to a 133, so a pretty drastic difference for him as well. Whereas Linda, not much of a change. So there are some changes that are happening though with those values when you input the new, and just kind of depends on the new values that they're adding in there.